I am back with part 2 of my deep dive into the Scott Peterson murder trial. For those of you who don't remember, this is a murder case from about 20 years ago. It was in Modesto, California. A young woman named Lacey Peterson was killed, and she was pregnant at the time, 8 months pregnant, and her husband Scott was convicted of the crime and has spent all this time in prison. The LA Innocence Project has recently picked up this case with the thought that maybe there might be some new DNA evidence that could get him a new trial. Like a lot of people, I've spent the last 2 decades thinking he was guilty, but I found out there's also a lot of people that don't think he did it. And so I decided to look at both sides and share both sides with you and let you decide. For today's video, I'm going to just cover a very short snapshot in time. So it's going to be from the evening of December 23rd, 2002 to the mid-morning of December 24th, Christmas Eve in 2002. And that was the day that Lacey was reported missing. Now, I've got both the prosecution's case and the defense case. I'm going to share each of those with you. Now, some things will correlate because there's things like emails and phone calls that have timestamps. So both sides agree on certain pieces, but I will show you where these two opinions differ. Both sides agree that on the evening of December 23rd of 2002, Scott and Lacey both went to the hair salon where her sister Amy worked. Scott went to get a haircut, and Lacey was asking for coaching on how to use a curling iron to style her hair a certain way. They spent some time chatting with Amy. Now, a couple things came out of this. Amy did notice, and she was able to testify in court, that Lacey was wearing tan pants and a black blouse with some little flowers on it. She also had said that Scott had told her that he was going to go golfing the next day, and that they had they were going to go home for dinner, and they had invited her to come over for dinner. Now, she had plans, so she didn't go, but she did say that they invited her over. Neither side disputes that they returned home. Scott says they watched TV, they ate some pizza, and then at 8:30, Lacey called her mom, and it gives both sides agree with that. The mom testified that yes, that call took place, and that was the last time her mom spoke with her. Now, the prosecution believes that Scott killed his wife sometime that night, and that he wrapped her in a tarp and he put her out in the bed of his truck. His truck had been pulled in, like backed into the driveway, and they believe that he wrapped her up and put her out there sometime overnight until the next morning when he knew he could safely take the body away. Just the physical understanding of this is Lacey is about 5'1", but she was 8 months pregnant. So she weighed about 150 pounds. So she was short and pretty round. So they say he wrapped her up, he carried her out to the truck and put her in the back of the truck. And Scott was a pretty good sized dude. So this is reasonable to understand that he could lift 150 pounds and put it in the back of his truck. That's not unreasonable. They say that sometime the next morning, around just before 10 o'clock, Scott left his home with his wife's body in the back of the truck, and he drove to a warehouse that he uses for work. He's a fertilizer salesman. So he drove to the workplace. His truck does not fit inside the warehouse. So again, he backed in, and inside the warehouse was his 14-foot fishing boat and the boat trailer. So he had to back in to pull it out anyway. While he was at the warehouse, he spent about an hour doing some work administrative stuff. He did some emailing. He looked up a thing online, an instruction manual online on how to build this new tool that he bought. So he dinked around the office for a little while, but there is record of him being there for that time. He then hooked up the boat trailer to the back of his truck, and he left the warehouse at about 11:15 a.m. to head to the Berkeley Marina to go fishing. So that is the prosecution. That's literally like the entirety of that morning of what they think happened, but they definitely think that Lacey was killed the night before. Scott's story has a little bit different detail in it. So according to Scott's story, they went home that evening. Lacey changed out of her clothes and put on some pajamas. Then he described them as blue pajama bottoms. She put those on. They ate some pizza. They watched some TV. She talked to her mom at 8:30, and then they went to bed. Scott claims they both woke up at about 7 o'clock in the morning. Lacey got up, she showered, she put on a fresh pair of clothes. Now, just so you know, the police, when they did a search, they found both the clothes that she had worn to the salon the night before and the blue pajama bottoms. Those were in the hamper. So all the articles of clothing that everyone described her as wearing were found in the home. So Scott had said she showered that morning. She put on a fresh set of clothes that morning. He said they hung out kind of downstairs in the kitchen. They were eating breakfast. The TV was on. They were chatting about what they were going to do that day. She had gone online and looked at a couple of things. She was on a site for the Gap looking for a red scarf, and then she was looking at a sunflower umbrella online, and that was between about 8:40, 8:45-ish. Lacey had told him that her day was going to consist of her walking the dog. She was going to mop the floors. She was going to go to the store, and she was going to just basically kind of hang around the house. Their plan was to go to her parents' house for dinner that night. So whatever they did, they were both going to meet back at the house and be ready to go to dinner. According to Scott, his wife asked him to fill up a mop bucket for her because it was difficult for her to carry it. So he did. He left the mop bucket. He started loading into his truck the patio umbrellas because it is Christmas Eve and there is no need for the summer patio umbrellas anymore. So he was loading them up into the back of the truck. And his story is that he was going to take them, since he was going to the warehouse anyway, he was going to drop them off and store them in his warehouse. A neighbor's statement says that he saw Scott that morning loading an umbrella into the back of his truck. They kind of said hi to each other. How's it going? Blah, blah, blah. Neighbor goes back to doing his thing. Scott says when he came back in from loading that umbrella, he came in and Lacey was watching TV, and he very distinctly remembered that she was watching an episode of Martha Stewart. And that particular time of the episode was about something with meringue, cookies and meringue. So he remembered Lacey watching that episode. His version of things is the same. He leaves around 9:50. He goes to the warehouse. He does some emailing, and then he does look online how to build this tool that he got, and then he hooks up the boat and he leaves his warehouse at about 11:15. The stories differ because the police say that Scott killed her the night before. They can't really say how, and they can't say what time, because at this point there's no body. So they have zero physical evidence, and there isn't any sign of struggle, or there isn't any crime scene. Like there's no blood that's been dried or anything like that. So they don't have a time that they could put on it, but they insist that she was killed that night before and loaded in the tarp and put in the truck, which means it would be in the back of the truck while it sat outside the warehouse until he could either move her from the truck into the boat or whatever he did. It was closer to 10:30, but a neighbor says that they saw their dog Mackenzie, the Peterson Scott dog Mackenzie, out walking around in the street near the home by himself. And so the neighbor went and grabbed Mackenzie, put him in the backyard, closed the gate. The leash was still on him, and the neighbor noticed that the leash had been wet and muddy, like it had been dragged behind the dog for a while without an owner holding onto it. Once hearing Scott's story, the police still believed that he'd killed her the night before and that everything he'd done that morning was in an attempt to build an alibi for himself. So he said that the internet searches at the Gap and for the umbrella were actually conducted by him, pretending to be Lacey, that the dog running loose in the street was by Scott. He let the dog out so that he could say that Lacey went for a walk with the dog and she disappeared, which was the story that everybody went with. She took that dog for a walk and she never came home, and nobody knows what happened to her. The police had also said that that mop bucket wasn't used for Lacey to mop the floor, that it was used for Scott to clean up some sort of crime scene. And most importantly, they thought they caught him in a big lie when they had said that Martha Stewart that morning wasn't about meringue, and that he was lying because that's not what they were watching on TV. But it turns out it was on Martha Stewart that morning, because Mark Garagos, the defense attorney, walked into court on the very first day, and during his opening statements, he showed the exact clip that was played at 9:48 that morning on Martha Stewart, and it was about cookies and meringue. So having looked at both sides of this equation, I have one outstanding question that I don't think I've ever heard anybody ask. If Scott killed Lacey the evening of the 23rd, put her in the truck when it was dark out, and his plan was to leave there the next morning, why did he wait until 10 a.m. to do it? Because if she was already dead, there's no excuse, there's no need for him to stick around and get an alibi. Both golfing and fishing most often are early morning activities. Nobody would think any different if you said I had a 7 a.m. tea time or I was going to go out early to go fishing. In fact, Scott's father-in-law, Lacey's stepdad, was fishing that morning very early as well, in the same place where Scott went. So it wouldn't be unusual for him to do either of those activities. He could have told the police, listen, I left the house at 6 a.m. I don't know what happened after that. Lacey was still asleep when I left. So why would he stick around for 4 hours with his wife's body in the back of his truck? Why? I don't understand that. Why wouldn't he leave first thing, the crack of dawn, before the sun came up, before the risk of anybody seeing her out there in his truck? Why wouldn't he go get the boat and go immediately to the marina and do it right away? If he did it, why would he wait 4 hours, fill a mop bucket, watch Martha Stewart, get on the internet? Why would he do all of that if she was really dead the night before? What was the police's reason that he would stick around for 4 hours that morning? That's the one I can't answer.